Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick, Cornett, and Kent Meyers. Our guest is Mark Stansberry. We're talking about oil, natural gas, OPEC, alternative fuels, a lot of items in the energy industry. Kent?
Well, I certainly remember the OPEC oil embargo well back in the mid-'70s and the gasoline lines and all. And of course, it seems like OPEC still has an enormous impact on our life here in the United States. Is OPEC going to be able to sustain its current level of oil production for the foreseeable future?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, you know, we reached our peak in the United States in oil in 1970, and we're questioning now the OPEC information as far as reserves studies. They're not transparent. We don't know for sure, you know, what the reserves really are. So it puts a big question mark of what the future really is. And again, that's the breaking point. We need to stop and examine that. Matt Simmons wrote a book, he's an investment banker out of Houston, wrote a book that was very well read among at least the energy sector called Twilight in the Desert. And he challenges Saudi Arabia and other countries, members of OPEC, where are your reserves? And you know, in the next, he feels like it's sooner than later that we'll reach that peak. So we are at that stopping point, at least a breaking point.
You seem to be bullish on natural gas as compared to oil, coal, or alternative energies. Why is that?
Natural gas is the cleanest of the fossil fuels. I mean, if you take coal and oil, it's definitely the cleanest of the three. The abundance of natural gas, if we would open up our federal lands, especially in the Rockies, East Coast, West Coast, in Alaska, we have an abundance, reserves of natural gas. So we have great opportunities, and I mentioned earlier, you know, we have 16 years of reserves that we know of, but to open up these other areas for drilling, it would be great. But in our own backyard here in Oklahoma, we have a tremendous amount of natural gas, and it's interesting, the gross production tax, we used to think about oil, but in 2006, $1 billion, in excess of $1 billion for gross production tax off of natural gas primarily. And so natural gas is a big supporter of many things when you think about the roadways, education, and so forth, and the great hearts of the oil and gas industry in supporting that effort as well on their own.
Well, kind of tying into that, supporting things that go on around the industry, I know you were involved through an energy advocates group in the Centennial events. Tell us about that.
Yes, going back to 1974, the oil embargo time frame, the Energy Advocates was founded. And since that time, they put on forums, and they supported, they being oil and gas executives primarily in the past. Now, all forms of energy are represented by the energy advocates, not just in the oil and gas sector and the fossil fuels, but solar, wind, and so forth. And so members in nuclear as well come together, and we put on this year a Centennial events, 4 Centennial events under the Energy Advocates Energy Policy Conference. And we had a salute to women in energy that was held in Tulsa. We had a salute to the past. Governor Frank Keating led that effort, and then we had a salute to the present and a salute to the future, which is a salute to the future. It's one that's dear to my heart because it's scholarships to young folks going into energy management.
We hear a lot about energy independence. What does that mean, first of all, to you, and how achievable is that?
Well, I think it's better say getting less energy dependent than say independent. I think we've got to get there first, and that means that those countries that we identified in the breaking point that are anti-American, hostile to America, that we definitely need to look at increasing our reserves, going into the federal lands, increasing our reserves in natural gas fields, and have the support of the American public in a big way for the oil and gas industry to do their job. And that's where I hope that we become less dependent. To become independent is going to be many, many years down the road, but that's hopefully a goal that we can reach.
For the past 16 years or so, you've been involved with the International Energy Policy Conference. Yeah. Tell our viewers what that is. I realize now your office is right here in Oklahoma City, is it not?
Yes. Well, we have a D.C. office, Washington, D.C., Oklahoma City, and Tulsa. And the International Energy Policy Conference was founded back in the 1990s, 1992. I had approached Dr. Gertz at the time, who was head of the Sargent Energy Center, to hold an energy policy conference
At OU.
at OU. And I had gone over to Russia, saw the problems that were there at that point in time with the delegation, and we saw that environmental energy infrastructure was in terrible shape. And so I was very encouraged to have this conference. And so we started the conference in 1992, and this is our 16th year to have a conference. This year will be in Washington, D.C. The State Chamber will be a co-host along with MIPT, which is the Memorial Institute for Prevention of Terrorism, and we'll have some other co-hosts as well. But we now have seen this become a forum to talk about energy policy issues, energy policy overall. We've had speakers from across the world, from Prime Minister of Scotland. We've had UN Ambassador Jean Kirkpatrick and others that were the honorary chairs as well.
I noticed that the Times Man of the Year was Mr. Putin from Russia. And you were talking about Russia's infrastructure. Has his leadership or control had any effect on Russia's infrastructure insofar as supplying their own energy is concerned?
We've been very careful not to be active in Russia. We were active for quite some time. We were approached back.
It's a little dangerous.
It's very dangerous, and we haven't seen that it's a great place to re-enter at this point from our perspective, GTD Group. We were approached back in the 90s. We visited with, at that time, Yuri Shafronik. There were 4 of us that met with him. He was the head of Minister of Energy for Russia. There were 35,000 idle wells in Russia. How can Americans help get those wells back in production? That has not been taken care of. There's still a bunch of wells that are idle.
In your book, The Breaking Point, you really are trying to call attention and a conclusion that you hope the reader reaches. What should this country do? If they took the advice that's in The Breaking Point, what changes would be made in the United States?
First of all, we would become, again, less dependent by opening up, encouraging the oil and gas industry to do their job. And
so is this a
federal
different
lands.
national energy policy? Is this
really
a new focus?
It's similar to what I would say Sam Nunn said, Senator Sam Nunn, former senator, at the recent conference at OU. He said, we really don't have an energy policy. And I would say that's probably true.
Yeah,
we need
one.
We need a comprehensive energy policy that addresses this and have the American public behind it. And that's where, instead of blaming, I would say that the consumer blames the government officials blaming the oil and gas industry. Let's all come together and let's work for energy less energy dependence, and the goal to be independent down the road.
Got less than a minute to go. Environmentalists seem to be wanting to stop the fossil fuel industry from going further. How catastrophic could that be, not only for Oklahoma and the energy sector, but for the country as we look forward and trying to be productive in this century? Well,
it's going to definitely stop us in our tracks. We cannot really afford that. Part of our conference back in 1992 when it was founded was we were going to strive for energy and environmental preservation. That was really the theme of the conference. And that's what we want to do in the oil and gas industry. That's what we want to do in the energy sector overall. When I talk to those in any of these energy industries that are under the Energy Advocates umbrella, we all want to see environmental preservation. So we need to work together on that. But yes, it's a challenge.
All right. Mark Stansberry, his book is The Breaking Point, along with Jason P. Reinbold. We appreciate you coming on The Verdict today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Kent and I'll have a final word right after this. We are back on The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Meyers wrapping up a show with Mark Stansberry in which we discovered his book, The Breaking Point, which really talks about what I think he would say is a potential coming crisis in worldwide production of energy and productivity.
Well, indeed, and I think it's generally recognized that many of the elements he points out are potential problems, but this book is a good way to get them all in one spot and to try to balance one against the other. I think he's done an interesting, he and his co-author, Mr. Reinbold, have done a good job in balancing the various factors and trying to put it in perspective for us so that we can see what in the world we ought to do about energy.
And next week's show?
Next week we're going to be talking with Scott Meacham,
State Treasurer.
State Treasurer,
okay.
and a frequent a visitor to the verdict.
Absolutely. I want to give information on this book. Thebreakingpoint.com is the website where you can go and order this. Yankee also said it was going to be available in your favorite bookstore before too long, too. And also, go to our website, theverdict.tv. Log in, check out our future shows, but tell us about shows that you'd like to see right here on The Verdict. For Kent Meyers, I'm Mick Cornett, and we'll see you next week right here.